Hey everybody, and welcome back to Everyday English Pod.
It's great to be back.
So today we're going to be talking about how to build a daily plan for learning English.
Yes, exactly.
And we're looking at, kind of like a recent conversation that happened between language learners.
Right.
And I think the first thing that we should talk about is goals. Like, it's really important, I think, to set clear goals for yourself when you're learning English.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think the first thing is that you really want to decide what you want to achieve with your English learning.
Yeah.
Because, if you don't have a specific goal in mind, then your efforts might end up being a little scattered.
Right.
You might not be sure what to focus on or even how to measure your progress.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to get lost.
Totally.
If you're not exactly sure what it is you're aiming for.
Are you trying to improve your vocabulary? Are you working on speaking more fluently? Are you trying to, nail down grammar? Once you've identified what you want to achieve, then you can start creating a plan that's tailored to meet those specific goals.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of people, they just say oh, I want to learn English or I want to get better at English. But it's okay, well, what does that mean?
Exactly.
What does that mean to you?
And I think that having really specific goals provides focus and motivation.
Yeah.
It's kind of like having a destination in mind when you set out on a journey.
Right.
Without that destination, you're just kind of wandering around aimlessly.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
So a good starting point is to ask yourself, what do I want to be able to do with English?
Yeah.
So for example, do you want to be able to hold conversations with native speakers?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to read English books and articles? Or maybe you want to watch movies and TV shows without subtitles?
Right.
So once you have a clear understanding of your goals, then you can start breaking them down into smaller, more manageable steps. And this makes the whole process less overwhelming and more achievable.
That's such a good point.
And it also keeps you motivated because you're constantly making progress and seeing those small wins along the way.
I like that.
So it's really all about breaking things down.
Okay, so we've talked about goals now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about time management.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people are intimidated by the idea of, learning English every single day.
Yeah, that's a really common concern, actually.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that they need to dedicate hours and hours each day to see any progress.
Right.
But that's not necessarily true at all.
Yeah, I think that's really unrealistic too.
It is. And actually, what's more important is consistency over intensity.
Okay.
So even if you can only spare 30 minutes a day, but you do it consistently,
yeah,
you're going to see much better results than if you try to cram in a marathon session once a week.
Right, right.
And this was actually something that all the language learners in the conversation emphasized. They said that even short but regular study sessions can be incredibly effective.
Okay, that makes sense.
It does. And, it's all about creating a sustainable routine.
Uh-huh.
So instead of trying to fit in huge chunks of study time, think about how you can incorporate smaller, more manageable study sessions into your daily life.
So you're saying maybe instead of studying for 2 hours on a Saturday,
right,
just do 30 minutes every day.
Exactly. Okay, I see what you're saying. And I think that's actually a really good way to make it feel less overwhelming and more like a natural part of your day.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
And what about dividing up your time when you are studying?
Okay, well, yeah, that's another really important aspect.
Yeah.
You don't want to spend all your time on just one skill, like just reading or just listening.
Right.
It's important to have a balanced approach.
Yeah, so maybe some reading, some listening, and then maybe try to have a conversation with somebody in English.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you could dedicate some time to vocabulary, building some time to grammar practice, some time to listening to podcasts or watching movies, and then some time to actually speaking.
Right.
Either with a language partner or even just practicing by yourself.
Right, right.
And this way you're developing all the different aspects of your English ability and not neglecting any particular area.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And, it also keeps things interesting because you're constantly switching between different activities.
Right, right. I can see that.
So yeah, just make sure you're getting a good mix of practice.
Okay, and one thing that was really interesting to me from the conversation was this idea of, tackling the hardest things first.
Oh, tell me more about that.
For example, if you are really bad at speaking English.
Yeah.
Maybe you just need to do that more often.
Okay, so you're saying if speaking is your biggest challenge, you should actually prioritize it and dedicate more time to practicing it.
Yeah, I think it's easy to avoid the things that are really hard.
Yeah.
It is. But maybe if you just start with the hardest thing, then you can like get over that hump.
I see what you're saying. So like
Yeah.
if you confront those challenges head on,
Yeah.
it can actually accelerate your progress
Right.
because you're tackling the areas that need the most work.
And it's like once you get over that hurdle,
Yeah.
like then you can kind of relax a little bit.
Exactly. And it can be really empowering too.
Yeah.
You know, to overcome those fears and to realize that you're capable of more than you thought you were.
Right, right. And I think it makes everything else feel easier.
It definitely can.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't be afraid to jump right into those challenging areas.
Right.
And, you know, there are lots of resources available to help you practice,
Yeah.
like conversation apps or language exchange partners.
Right.
So don't be shy about seeking out those opportunities.
Okay, so I think another really important part of this whole thing is making sure that you're enjoying what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because if you're not having fun, you're not going to stick with it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, learning English should be an enjoyable experience,
Right.
not a chore.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people make the mistake of choosing materials that are either too difficult or just not interesting to them.
Yeah, I think it's really important to find resources that you actually find engaging.
Right.
Whether it's books, movies, TV shows, podcasts, or even just like talking to people.
Yeah.
You know, if you're genuinely interested in what you're learning, you're going to be more motivated to stick with it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have those clear goals that we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Like if you know what you're aiming for, you can choose materials that are actually relevant to your interests.
Oh, right. And you know, it's also okay to experiment and try different things until you find something that really clicks for you.
Yeah, like, you know, maybe one week you're really into podcasts and then the next week you're like, I just want to read a book.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think that's totally fine.
Okay, so we've talked about goals, time management, tackling the hard things first, and making it enjoyable.
Okay.
Now let's talk about review and reinforcement.
Okay, so this is all about making sure that what you learn actually sticks.
Yeah.
You know, it's not enough to just encounter new words or grammar rules once.
Right.
You need to review them regularly to solidify them in your memory.
And I think this is where a lot of people fall short.
I agree.
Because it's like, okay, you learn a new word,
Yeah.
and then you just kind of forget about
You
it.
move on to the next thing and
Yeah.
you never really like come back to it.
Yeah.
So one really effective technique is to spend just a few minutes at the end of each study session to quickly go over the new material that you've learned. So this could involve like writing down new vocabulary words and their definitions.
Wow.
Or reviewing grammar rules, or even just like quickly summarizing what you've learned in your own words.
Okay, I like that.
And this regular revisiting helps to transfer information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory, which is where it needs to be if you want to be able to actually use it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And, you know, there are also lots of different apps and websites that can help you with this process, like
Yeah.
spaced repetition software, for example, can be really effective for memorizing new vocabulary.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, don't underestimate the power of review and reinforcement.
Okay, now let's talk about positive reinforcement, because I think this is like a really fun one.
Yeah, this is all about rewarding yourself for your efforts.
Yes.
You know, it's important to celebrate your progress and to give yourself some positive feedback.
Yeah, like why not?
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be anything big or fancy. It could be as simple as like watching an episode of your favorite TV show.
Yeah.
Or having a piece of chocolate.
Or like taking a break and go for a walk or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So whatever it is that you enjoy,
Yeah.
make sure to incorporate it into your learning routine as a way to reward yourself for sticking with it.
Okay, and then there's this idea of starting your day with English,
Oh, okay.
which I think is really interesting.
What do you mean by that?
Well, like maybe listening to a podcast in English,
Uh-huh.
or maybe like reading an article in English.
Oh, okay. So you're saying like incorporating some English learning into your morning routine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, actually.
Yeah.
You know, it's a way to kind of like set the tone for the day
Right.
and to get your brain thinking in English right from the start.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time.
No.
Maybe just like 15 or 20 minutes.
Exactly. And, you know, it could be something as simple as listening to an English news broadcast while you're having breakfast
Yeah.
or reading a few pages of an English book while you're drinking your coffee.
Right.
So yeah, just find something that you enjoy and that you can easily fit into your morning routine.
Okay, so we've talked about starting your day with English. What about integrating English into your daily tasks?
Okay, so this is all about finding opportunities to use English throughout your day. even when you're not specifically studying.
Right.
So, for example, you could listen to English music while you're working out,
Yeah.
or you could watch English language TV shows or movies in your free time,
Yeah.
or you could even try to think in English while you're doing everyday tasks,
Oh, right.
like cooking
Yeah.
or cleaning.
Yeah.
You know, just little things like that can really help to keep your brain engaged with the language.
Yeah, and it's like you're not even really studying. You're just like living your life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a way to make English a more natural part of your daily routine.
Okay, so that's integrating English into your daily tasks.
Yeah.
What about vocabulary building?
Okay, well, vocabulary is obviously a crucial part of language learning,
Yeah.
and there are lots of different ways to go about it.
Yeah.
But one of the most effective techniques is using flashcards.
Uh-huh.
And you can either use physical flashcards
Yeah.
or there are lots of different apps and websites that you can use as well.
Right.
And the key with flashcards is to review them regularly and to use a spaced repetition system.
Okay, what is that?
So spaced repetition is a learning technique
Uh-huh.
that involves reviewing material at increasing intervals.
Okay.
So basically, you start by reviewing new vocabulary words very frequently,
Uh-huh.
and then as you become more familiar with them,
Right.
you gradually space out the intervals between reviews.
Okay, so you're not just like looking at the same flashcards every single day.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
more about like strategically timing your reviews
Got it.
to maximize retention.
Okay.
And this has been shown to be a really effective way to learn and memorize new information.
All right, and then there's journaling in English.
Okay, so journaling is a great way to practice your writing skills
Ah.
and to improve your vocabulary and grammar.
Yeah.
And it's also a really good way to just kind of like process your thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
And to reflect on your day.
And it doesn't have to be a long journal entry.
No,
You
sure.
could just be like a few sentences.
Exactly. Just like 5 or 10 minutes a day can make a big difference.
And you don't have to worry about making it perfect.
No.
It's just about like getting your thoughts down on paper.
Exactly. Yeah, the goal is just to practice writing in English
Okay.
and to get into the habit of expressing yourself in the language.
Right, so we've talked about journaling.
Yeah.
What about finding a language buddy?
Okay, so finding a language buddy can be a really great way to improve your speaking and listening skills.
Uh-huh.
And it's also just a fun way to connect with someone else who's also learning English.
Right. And you can kind of like motivate each other.
Exactly. You can hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
And you can also like practice different conversation topics.
Right.
And get feedback on your pronunciation and grammar.
And there are a lot of different ways to find a language buddy.
There are, yeah.
Like you can join online language exchange communities,
Uh-huh.
or you can look for local meetups, or you can even ask your friends or colleagues if they know anyone who might be interested. And I think this is another one that's really important, tracking your progress.
Yes, tracking your progress is crucial
Yeah.
for staying motivated and seeing how far you've come.
Right, because it's easy to get discouraged if you feel like you're not making any progress.
Totally.
Yeah.
So it's important to have a way to track your progress,
All right.
whether that's keeping a journal
Yeah.
or using an app or
Uh-huh.
even just like making a list of the goals that you've achieved.
Yeah. I like that.
So just find a system that works for you
Mm-hmm.
and make sure to track your progress so you can see how far you've come.
Okay, so we've talked about tracking your progress now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about creating a comfortable study environment.
Okay, so this is all about setting yourself up for success
Yeah.
by creating a space where you can focus and concentrate.
Right.
So this means finding a quiet place
Uh-huh.
where you won't be interrupted. And it also means making sure that you have all the materials that you need.
Yeah, like your books, your notebooks, your pens.
Exactly, and maybe like a comfortable chair
Yeah.
and good lighting.
Right.
So just make sure that it's a space where you feel comfortable and where you can really focus on your studies.
And I think it's important to kind of like make it your own space.
Yes, definitely.
Like maybe put up some inspirational quotes or pictures or something.
Absolutely, yeah, personalize it.
Yeah.
Make it your own.
Okay, so we've talked about creating a comfortable study environment.
Mm-hmm.
What about setting a consistent study time?
Okay, so this is all about establishing a routine
Mm,
and making English learning a regular part of your schedule.
right.
So the best time to study will vary depending on your individual circumstances.
Uh-huh.
But the important thing is to find a time that works for you
Right.
and to stick to it as much as possible.
So maybe like every day after dinner?
Yeah,
Or maybe like every morning before work?
exactly.
Okay.
And by having a set study time,
Yeah.
you're more likely to actually make time for it.
Right.
And you're also helping to train your brain
Uh-huh.
to focus on English at that particular time.
Right, because it just becomes like a habit.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about setting a consistent study time.
Mhm.
Now, let's talk about incorporating technology.
Okay, so technology can be a really powerful tool for language learning.
Right.
There are tons of different apps and websites that can help you with everything from vocabulary and grammar
Right.
to speaking and listening.
Yeah.
So some popular apps include Duolingo, Babbel, and Memrise,
Yeah.
but there are many others out there as well.
Right.
So just do some research and find a few that you think might be helpful for you.
And what I like about apps is that they're like really convenient.
Totally.
Yeah.
You can use them anywhere, anytime.
Right.
And they often make learning more fun and engaging
Yeah.
than traditional methods.
Yeah, like you can be sitting on the bus or like waiting for a friend.
Exactly. And you can just like pull out your phone and do a quick lesson.
Right. Right.
So yeah, technology can be a really great way to supplement your other learning activities.
Okay, so we've talked about incorporating technology now. Let's talk about active listening.
Okay, so active listening is a really important skill for language learners
Uh-huh.
because it helps you to really understand what you're hearing
Right.
and to pick up on new vocabulary and grammar.
Yeah.
So when you're listening to something in English, whether it's a podcast, a movie, or a conversation,
Right.
try to really focus on what's being said and don't be afraid to pause and rewind
Right.
if you need to.
Yeah, or like take notes.
Exactly. Yeah, take notes on any new vocabulary, words, or phrases that you hear,
Right.
and then look them up later and try to use them in your own speaking and writing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and you can also try to like shadow the speaker, which means repeating what they're saying as you're listening. And this can help you to improve your pronunciation and to get a feel for the rhythm and intonation of the language.
Okay, and then there's this idea of incorporating short speaking exercises.
Okay, so this is all about practicing your speaking skills. Even when you don't have a language partner.
Right.
So one way to do this is to simply talk to yourself in English.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It might sound a little strange, but it can actually be really helpful.
Okay.
So you could describe what you're doing, or you could talk about your plans for the day,
Right.
or you could even just like read aloud from a book or article.
Okay.
And this is a great way to get comfortable with the sounds of English and to practice your pronunciation
Right.
without feeling self-conscious because nobody's listening.
Yeah, no pressure.
Exactly. And another way to do short speaking exercises is to use prompts.
Oh, okay.
So you could find a list of conversation prompts online, or you could even just like write down some topics, right?
That you're interested in.
Okay.
And then just talk about them for a few minutes.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And, the more you practice speaking, the more confident and fluent you'll become.
Okay, so we've talked about short speaking exercises. Now let's talk about mixing up your activities.
Okay, so it's important to keep things interesting.
Yeah.
And to avoid getting bored.
Right.
So don't be afraid to mix up your learning activities. Some days you might want to focus on vocabulary.
Yeah.
Other days you might want to work on grammar.
Right.
And other days you might want to just like relax and watch a movie.
Right. Or listen to some music.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So just find a balance that works for you. And make sure to keep things fresh and engaging.
All right. So mixing up your activities, what about including breaks?
Okay. So breaks are really important for staying focused and avoiding burnout.
Right, because if you just study for like hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, you're going to get tired. Yeah, you're going to get tired and you're going to lose focus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's important to take regular breaks to give your brain a chance to rest.
Right.
And to recharge.
Okay, so how often should you take breaks?
Well, it depends on the person. But a good rule of thumb is to take a 5 to 10 minute break every 25 to 30 minutes of studying.
Okay, so it's like the Pomodoro technique.
Exactly.
Right.
So during your breaks, get up and move around.
Right.
Or go outside for some fresh air.
Yeah.
Or just like close your eyes and relax for a few minutes.
Right, right.
And when you come back to your studies, you'll be more focused and refreshed.
Okay, so breaks are important. Now let's talk about maintaining consistency and flexibility.
Okay, so consistency is key when it comes to language learning.
Yeah.
But life happens.
Right.
And there are going to be days when you just can't stick to your schedule.
Yeah.
So it's important to be flexible and to not beat yourself up
Right.
if you miss a day or two.
Yeah, because I think it's easy to just kind of give up.
It is, if you feel like you've fallen off track.
Right.
So just try to get back on track as soon as possible.
Uh-huh.
And don't let a few missed days turn into a complete derailment
Yeah.
of your learning journey.
Okay, and then there's creating achievable milestones.
Okay, so this is all about setting small, realistic goals
Uh-huh.
that you can actually achieve.
Right.
So instead of saying, like, I'm going to learn 100 new vocabulary words this week,
Yeah.
maybe start with, like, 10 or 20.
Right.
Or instead of saying, like, I'm going to watch an entire movie in English,
Uh-huh.
maybe start with just, like, one episode of a TV show.
Right.
So by setting achievable milestones,
Uh-huh.
you're more likely to stay motivated
Right.
and to feel a sense of accomplishment.
Okay, so achievable milestones. Now, what about celebrating progress?
Okay, so it's important to acknowledge and celebrate your achievements,
Yeah.
no matter how small they might seem.
Right.
So if you learn a new vocabulary word, or if you're able to hold a short conversation in English,
Right.
take a moment to celebrate that.
Yeah, I like that.
You know, give yourself a pat on the back,
Huh?
or share your success with a friend,
Right.
or even just like take a few minutes to reflect on how far you've come.
Yeah, I think it's easy to just kind of like focus on the negative.
It is
Yeah.
like what you haven't achieved yet. So it's really important to focus on the positive
Yeah.
and to celebrate your successes.
Okay, so celebrating progress. Now, let's talk about weekly plan review and adjustment.
Okay, so this is all about making sure that your learning plan is still working for you.
Uh-huh.
So at the end of each week,
Yeah.
take some time to reflect on what went well
Right.
and what could be improved,
Right.
and then make any necessary adjustments to your plan for the following week.
Okay, so you're saying like if you tried something and it didn't work,
Yeah,
then just try something else.
exactly. Don't be afraid to experiment
Uh-huh.
and to find what works best for you. And, you know, your needs might change over time.
Uh-huh.
So it's important to be flexible
Right.
and to adjust your plan as needed.
Okay, so we've talked about weekly plan review and adjustment. Now let's talk about integrating English into the environment.
Okay, so this is all about surrounding yourself with English as much as possible. So you could do things like labeling objects around your house with their English names,
Okay.
or changing the language settings on your phone and computer to English,
Right.
or listening to English music and podcasts in the background. You know,
Yeah.
there's just little things like that
Uh-huh.
can really help to create an immersive environment that will help you to learn English more naturally.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And, you know, the more you expose yourself to English,
Uh-huh.
the faster you'll learn.
Okay, so integrating English into the environment. Now, what about pairing with a learning buddy or community?
Okay, so as we discussed earlier,
Uh-huh.
having a learning buddy or joining a community of other English learners can be a really great way to stay motivated and to get support.
Yeah.
So if you're not already doing this,
Uh-huh.
I highly recommend it.
Okay, and what about visualization techniques?
Okay, so visualization is a powerful technique
Uh-huh.
that can help you to achieve your goals.
Right.
And it can also be really helpful for language learning.
Okay, so how does it work?
Well, basically, you close your eyes
Mm-hmm.
and you imagine yourself speaking English fluently and confidently.
Okay.
You can imagine yourself having a conversation with a native speaker,
Uh-huh.
or giving a presentation in English,
Right.
or even just like ordering food at a restaurant. And the more you visualize yourself succeeding,
Uh-huh.
the more likely you are to actually achieve your goals.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a great way to build confidence
Uh-huh.
and to overcome any fears or anxieties
Right.
that you might have about speaking English.
Okay, so we've talked about visualization techniques now. What about gradual reading?
Okay, so gradual reading is a good approach for people who are new to reading in English,
Uh-huh.
or for people who find it challenging.
Right.
So the idea is to start with easier materials,
Right.
like children's books or graded readers,
Okay.
and then gradually work your way up to more difficult texts.
So you're not just like jumping into Shakespeare.
Exactly, yeah. You want to build up your reading skills gradually,
Uh-huh.
and as you progress,
Uh-huh.
you'll be able to read more challenging materials,
Right.
and you'll also expand your vocabulary and improve your grammar.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and you know, it's also important to choose materials that you're interested in,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're not enjoying what you're reading,
Right.
you're less likely to stick with it.
Right.
So find something that you find engaging
Uh-huh.
and that you can read without getting too frustrated.
Okay. And then finally, staying curious.
Yes, staying curious is essential for language learning.
Yeah.
You know, the more curious you are,
Uh-huh.
the more you'll want to learn. So don't be afraid to ask questions,
Uh-huh.
to explore new topics,
Right.
and to experiment with different learning methods.
Yeah.
You know, the world is full of opportunities to learn English.
Oh, yeah.
So just stay curious. Host speaker,